Good morning from WKYT News. I'm Bill Bryant. We welcome you to Kentucky Newsmakers, and we certainly hope you've been enjoying your Thanksgiving weekend. Later, Lexington Vice Mayor Dan Wu will talk about a program helping people with their medical bills. That is coming up shortly, but first, Michael Halligan is here from God's Pantry. As many of us savor the holiday foods we enjoyed over this weekend, others are struggling. The recent historic government shutdown led to disruptions in SNAP benefits. That put on display what we already knew. Many Kentuckians are hungry or very close to going hungry. It's men, it's women, children, and the elderly. And 1 in 5 in central and eastern Kentucky don't know where their next meal is coming from. God's Pantry supports more than 500 pantries and meal programs in the region. Michael Halligan is president and CEO of God's Pantry. He spent his career getting food to those who need it. Welcome. We appreciate you coming in today.
Bill, good morning, and thank you so much for having us on the show today.
Interesting timing that you could appear with us. We appreciate that because we know it's an important time when we're thinking about people who are hungry, but also for your fundraising efforts for the year. So we'll talk about all of that. But as people pull out their leftovers and enjoy that wonderful food that they've had over this weekend, how would you have them know about the struggles that others are facing?
So we just wrapped up our Sharing Thanksgiving program. That program has existed since 1994. And what we heard this year, over 7,500 households across 12 counties, is uncertainty. Uncertainty about where their next meal might come from, concern about inflationary impacts and the high cost of foods today versus what it was even a year ago. We saw a lot of grateful, thankful households that are so glad that they had a meal to be able to share at a Thanksgiving table, but they're worried about what next month looks like, what 2026 looks like. They're concerned.
The government shutdown was tough. Thousands of federal employees in Kentucky got no paycheck for a time, and many who depend on SNAP benefits had to do without. How eye-opening were those 43 days?
You know, so I would say that the ripple effects, those ripple effects are going to linger for quite some time while households start to recover. And our work is probably as critical as it's ever been. But here's something that I saw. I saw community lean in. I saw folks begin to understand and be more aware of hunger relief and the fact that hunger exists and the critical importance of all programs, SNAP, National School Lunch Program. They all have to work together. And perhaps more than at any time in our history, there's a heightened awareness of how critical all of those programs are and the importance of community leaning in to make a difference.
This was an attention-getting time.
You know, it really was. You know, we often talk about Kentuckians being resilient, but what we don't often talk about is why. And it's because people care about one another. And what I saw in the last couple of months was people understanding that it's an important time to make a difference. It's an important time to lean in and help those who are facing hunger, who may not be sure where their next meal comes from.
Were you able to surge capacity and get food out to more places and be a greater force than even usual during that time?
We did, and we are. So just a frame of reference, if I compare the first week in October to the first week in November, we saw a 40% increase in requests for food. We're still seeing those ripple effects today. We're still seeing households who are uncertain about how work requirements could impact benefits going forward, who are uncertain about if they're on a part-time job, whether they will be able to count on the benefits, who are uncertain if they're going to have to reapply for SNAP in January or later. A lot of uncertainty.
Back to that question, part-time job, what do you mean?
So someone who is working less than 20 hours a week is now going to be responsible for something called work requirement. And if they're working less than 20 hours a week, they may lose their benefit. And it affects a greater percentage of people than it used to. This is a law that went into effect on November 1st. Households with school-aged children 14 to 18 have never been subject to work requirements before. Now they are. Households aged 55 to 64 have never been responsible for work requirements before. Now they are. That creates a lot of uncertainty about whether or not they'll be able to put food on the table in the future.
We've heard you say that 19 of the nation's most food insecure counties are in central and eastern Kentucky, and it isn't always visible. Do some struggle in silence?
Very much so. We often talk about, the stigma of asking for help. And it's so important for all of us to realize it's not a handout, it's a hand up, right? We talk about the food, but the impact of that food is better education for kids. It's better working circumstances for those who are working, whether they're trying to find a job or whether they're trying to be productive and safe in their workplace when they're working, or the improvement on health outcomes because you have better nutrition. And now more than ever, people are starting to connect those dots in ways that I've not seen in my career.
Are people having to make nutritional choices because of the price and therefore are not getting as healthy a food as they might?
So that's one thing that God's Pantry Foodbank really focuses on. Our distribution last year was a little over 50 million pounds. Now it's hard to get your head around 50 million. That's 24.5 million plates of food. 40% of what we distributed, over 20 million pounds, was fresh produce because it's really expensive, and when folks are trying to stretch that dollar and they can count on the food bank to help them with the fresh produce, they can use the money that they do have in ways that are more effective for them.
I know you get food from a variety of sources.
We do.
What are some of those?
So the easiest way to think about it, about half of our food is donated. Grocery stores, retailers, wholesalers, merchandisers. About a third comes from the U.S. government, USDA Foods, administered by Kentucky Department of Ag, and about the last 15% or so we purchase. And right now, that purchased product piece of the puzzle is really, really important. And the month of December is our single largest fundraising time of year. Close to 20% of our donated dollars come into December, and most of that we use to purchase food.
Why is that?
So I think there's a couple of factors. The purchasing piece, what we try to do with our purchase product program is to make sure we are complementing the foods that are donated and the foods that do come from the USDA Foods program with the foods that are not. And I think from a donor standpoint, for the financial support that we get, people are thinking about those who are experiencing hunger between Thanksgiving and Christmas. They're thinking about kids who are going to be out of school over the holidays. They're thinking about the blessings of the holidays and how can they give back a little bit. And for some, it's the end of the tax year. All of those things factor into what we see is 20 to 25% of our annual donations in a single month.
For people in need, how can they find out about resources that may be available to them through God's Pantry or one of the associated food banks?
So the easiest way to do it for those who are experiencing hunger or for someone who knows someone else who is experiencing hunger, go to our website, godspantryfoodbank.org, click on Find Food, enter zip code, and our system will bring up the food pantries and meal programs that are closest to where someone lives so they can get the food to thrive.
And in talking about those donations, there's a big event coming up this week. In fact, in a couple of days, as this program is airing on Tuesday, and it's been kind of renamed and rebranded, but it is going to be ambitious this year.
Yeah, so it's on Giving Tuesday, a couple of days from now, right? And it's Bluegrass Gives. It's what used to be called the Good Giving Challenge, and that is our kickoff for the giving season of December. And our goal is to ask folks to lean in the way they've been leaning in for the last couple of months supporting our shutdown response efforts. Now more than ever is a critical time for our work, the importance of connecting people with one another, and that financial support makes a huge difference in our ability to do our work for 365 days a year.
So again, Giving Tuesday, and it's Bluegrass Gives.
I think it's called Bluegrass Gives. That's correct.
Yeah, it's going to be the new title. So we hope that folks will take a look at their options there. You've also said that there are many other ways to help, and one of those is that sometimes people organize their own food drive, right?
So in the month of November, the number of food drives that we saw was amazing, more than I've probably ever seen. There was the the sponsored food drive that the city did, right?
Yeah.
Over 40 sites. We had people coming to the food bank with donations. We had buggies in the front lobby. We had to unload those buggies 3, 4, 5 times a day.
The big give.
It was the big give. That's correct.
Yeah.
We saw businesses, we saw schools, we saw individuals, we saw other nonprofits who were doing food drives for God's Pantry Food Bank. That's community caring about community. And it was heartbreaking to know that it had to happen. It was so heart-filling to see it. We had one gentleman who came to the food bank with a vehicle load of food. He had literally went and spent $1,000 buying food at a grocery store simply so he could participate in that food drive.
Can that be sustained, that level of commitment from the public? I mean, it seems that when the public sees an opportunity to help and it is convenient for them, they get involved.
You know, what I've seen for years is during times of disaster, tornadoes, floods, hurricanes on the coasts, people lean in. The last month and a half was a disaster of a different kind, and people leaned in. What I think is really important for folks to consider is hunger. Food insecurity is a year-round disaster. If we can all just lean in a little bit more, the pathway towards people being able to thrive through nutrition changes. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we could all find a way to lean in just a little bit more, particularly this year, to make a difference in the lives of folks that are experiencing hunger that none of us may ever meet or know.
Michael, do you think people in this region realize how serious the problem is?
You know, I think people realize more now than maybe they ever have. You know, we talk about 280,000 people across central and eastern Kentucky. We talk about 750,000 people across the Commonwealth. 18.2%, over 16% across the Commonwealth. And it's getting worse. And we need to stop it from getting worse. And I think people, particularly over the last 2 months, have started to connect some dots. And the hunger safety net doesn't work if it's not public-private partnership. It doesn't work without SNAP. It doesn't work without National School Lunch Program. It doesn't work without Social Security. It doesn't work without food banks. It doesn't work without food pantries. It doesn't work without donors. All of those things. All of those things are necessary.
You have other partners that support, like Walmart shoppers who buy items online have an opportunity, right? There are other programs, roundup opportunities. Would you have people, really keep a keen eye out for those options and opportunities?
I would, and the reason why is it makes it really easy for someone to round up to the next dollar, and that next dollar becomes 10, and then it becomes 100. And then it becomes 1,000, and then maybe it becomes 10,000. And all of a sudden, a few pennies here and $1 or $2 there can be millions of dollars that we can apply to hunger relief. And that's the power of community giving back. That's the power of community engagement, $1 at a time.
As we all reminisce over the holidays and appreciate some history, the story of the founder of God's Pantry, very interesting, traces back to a woman named Mem Hunt, who'd been a social worker in New York City, retired back to Lexington thinking that the work was over, and discovered the hunger issues here.
And her goal in life was to end poverty and hunger in her beloved hometown, using her personal station wagon, storing food, some say in the basement, some say in the garage of her home over in Parker's Mill. I suspect it was both, right? And distributing that food into what she described as impoverished neighborhoods. Today, that vision is 16 trucks traveling over 400,000 miles a year in central and eastern Kentucky, 50 different counties, 500 food pantry and meal programs, 280,000 people. We all look back at Mem and we see that vision, and we realize how one person can make a difference. Imagine, if that one person was every resident of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and each person was making a little bit of a difference. That becomes a monumental success story on where we could go if we're able to.
Well, here we are in the middle of the holidays. What final thought would you like to leave people with?
So I think there's 3 things that I always encourage people to think about. Time, talent, treasure, right? If you have time to volunteer, volunteer. Many hands make light work. If you have the financial wherewithal to make a financial contribution, whether it's to God's Pantry Food Bank or whether it's to some other organization, now is the time to do that. For us, it's godspantryfoodbank.org. Click on the donate button. And if you have thought leadership and you want to advocate, now is the time to stand up for the importance of public-private partnership, whether it's at the federal level, the state level, or the local level, to help people understand the importance of all of us working together to end hunger.
Michael Halligan with God's Pantry, thanks for coming.
Thank you so much for having me, Bill.
Everybody stay with us on Kentucky Newsmakers. We'll be back to Lexington Vice Mayor Dan Wu and a program that he's been instrumental in. We're back in a moment. Welcome back to Kentucky Newsmakers. Lexington Vice Mayor Dan Wu is joining us now. Wu has championed a medical debt relief program in Fayette County. It's a partnership with Undo Medical Debt, and it has relieved Lexington residents of tens of millions of dollars of debt. Medical debt accounts for nearly 60% of debt on credit cards, and with poor health, Kentuckians have a higher burden than most. We'll ask the Vice Mayor about that and a couple of questions about a possible new city hall for Lexington and an expansion of micro-transit. Vice Mayor Dan Wu joining us. Thanks for coming. We appreciate it.
Of course.
This medical debt relief effort has been obviously a passion project for you. How does it work?
Yeah, so basically we have contracted with a national nonprofit called Undo Medical Debt. They have over 11 years experience in purchasing and abolishing medical debt. So now that we're in contract, they basically go out and talk to major hospital systems and medical providers and basically negotiate to see how much debt they have that is qualifying under our standards, and then buy them. And then once they're bought, letters go out to the patients, the recipients, the holders of this debt, to let them know that this debt has been bought and has been abolished. So our first wave of this, $12.6 million worth, letters have gone out last week to almost 6,500 Fayette County residents.
It's interesting that people can't apply for the program, but Undo Medical Debt identifies the qualifying accounts, right?
Correct, exactly, yeah. It's not something that you apply for. I've had a lot of folks come out in the past week asking me, I owe money to this particular hospital. How do I qualify for this program? And the answer I have to give them is you kind of have to wait and see to see if Undo Medical Debt goes into a purchase agreement with that particular hospital, and if your debt qualifies under that, you might get that letter as well.
This was $1 million contract by the Lexington Fayette Urban County government. As you know, the Herald Leader has raised some questions about the administrative costs within that $1 million. It's like a third of the cost, according to that reporting. And Mayor Gorton declined to sign that contract. Can you explain that?
Yeah, for sure. Ultimately, what attracted me to the program in the first place was the fact that you can get basically about 100 to 1 on your money in purchasing medical debt. So if you had told me that $1 of our city's money goes to buy $1 of medical debt, I would have said no way, right? We can't tackle a problem this big on a 1-to-1 basis. But if you're getting 100 to 1 on your money, it's kind of a no-brainer. You're never going to get a return on investment like that. So ultimately what they've told us and what we're under contract for is that we have put $1 million towards this effort, and if all of that gets spent at the end of our 3-year contract, we could erase upwards of $90 million of medical debt in Fayette County. That's a huge number.
Does it help the hospitals and providers collect some money that they otherwise might have to write off?
Yeah, so this is the kind of thing where in the past, before something like Undo Medical Debt existed, what a lot of hospital systems would do is they would sell at pennies on the dollar to collectors. These collectors, of course, will continue to hound folks who owe this debt, so that burden isn't lifted from the patients and from the debt holders, but it is then kind of transferred away from the hospital systems to these debt collectors.
Well, this administrative cost, the cost of running the program, do you take that to be excessive?
I don't. I think what the article highlighted was kind of the differences between this program and a lot of our other sort of standard contracts that we have with service providers or other nonprofit partners that we work with in the city. Those are really apples to oranges because the services that a lot of our local nonprofits provide is very different than the format of having to purchase and negotiate with hospital systems to buy this kind of debt. So the structure is very, very different. And ultimately, I looked at those fees as well, because I think in the beginning, I looked at it too in those percentages and says, oh yeah, this is kind of higher than this other kind of work that we do. Ultimately, for me, the bottom line is $1 million investment gets us $90 million worth of debt relief. That's huge.
Oftentimes in government things move slowly, but sometimes you have to move fast. And when the federal government shutdown was going on, the SNAP benefits were interrupted. There were needs for food, and you moved within city government to find some money to make available to God's Pantry and others to provide some food. And you did that by what? Identifying some other accounts that have been underfunded?
Yeah, basically what I looked to do was, instead of kind of reinventing the wheel or creating whole new programming that might take too long and be too onerous for folks, I looked at our extended services grants that we give out normally. So in the past 2 years, we had given out about $633,000 to 7 local nonprofits that work specifically in food insecurity and nutritional access. But the number that I saw was they had in total requested about $841,000. There was about a $208,000 gap. The only reason we didn't fund them fully was just budgetary. It wasn't that they didn't qualify. So I said, these are groups that we've already vetted, have scored, and have gone into contract with. We know them. They do really good work. They're in the middle of doing this work. I said, why not in this moment where the need is so dire, let's fund them fully. So I requested the $208,000 to come out of our unassigned fund balance, and council approved it unanimously.
It appears plans are moving forward for a new government center. The current city hall was considered a temporary fix when the Lexington-Fayette Urban County government bought it in 1982. There's been some pushback from some about the costs. Do you have a position at this point on a new city hall?
It's a really, really tough nut to crack, as many administrations and councils have seen over the years. And the biggest piece of it simply is cost. It's never going to get cheaper to do a city hall. And we, as you said, that building was never meant to be an office building or a government center. And we've been in there temporarily for 40 plus years. So there's a lot of deferred maintenance that's been stacking up in that building. So there are a lot of costs to staying, but there are certainly even bigger costs to moving potentially into a new building. I am not opposed to the idea of a city hall. I think we need a new city hall. The real question is, how much money can we put to it, and how much does that take away from other things that we might be looking at? Like a fire training center, for example, like a homeless shelter. We have other needs, and a lot of our residents have expressed those opinions about the other needs being much more dire and much more of a priority than something like a new city hall.
So where are you right now?
I'm honestly still on the fence about it. Yeah, I just want to make sure that if we do it and make that kind of investment, and we're looking at putting $30 million of capital towards getting the thing started, which is necessary for this deal to go forward, I want to make sure that our other priorities are also being addressed.
There are efforts to expand micro-transit in Lexington. We know Lextran recently got some federal dollars for buses, but this is kind of a different approach, right?
It is, yeah. Councilmember Ellinger and the BUILD organization have been pushing for microtransit for the last couple of years, and we ended up passing it because Councilmember Sheehan had suggested adding to the program and kind of having 2 parallel pilots going at the same time, with Rides United and the microtransit pilot that Lextran will be doing. So I think the thought behind that was just thinking about putting all tools on the table and making sure that before we make the larger permanent long-term investment, that we look at all the different options and see which ones work. And it may not even be a choice between this one versus this one. It may be some combination, because they kind of have different types of services.
Means smaller vehicles, basically, right? Not, yeah.
That's right.
Not buses, yeah.
Yeah, so the concept of microtransit is basically filling in the gaps of service in a transit system. So we're not necessarily talking about buses, we're talking about either like ride shares or specific cars that will pick people up and kind of fill those gaps.
We're in the filing window right now, and we have not seen your name on there yet. Do you plan to seek re-election, or?
I'm keeping people in suspense for just another minute or two. I'm planning to announce beginning of December.
People don't usually announce that loudly that they're not running for something.
Well, you know, when you listen to elected officials and when you ask them, are you running for X, Y, or Z, the answers don't really matter until you see the filing paperwork go through.
Might you run for something else other than the council at large?
You'll have to wait and see, Bill.
That's not a no. So it's going to be, you say December 6th we'll know?
Early December, yeah.
Okay, all right. We appreciate you coming in.
Thank you, Bill.
Vice Mayor Dan Wu. We're going to come back on WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers, and we'll wrap it up in just a moment. We appreciate you being with us for this edition of Kentucky Newsmakers. We have rescheduled Bob Quick to be with us among our guests next week on Kentucky Newsmakers. He is from Commerce Lexington. We'll be learning about regionalism and some other business aspects of the bluegrass. We hope you join us for WKYT News. We'll keep you up to date on all the latest as the legislative session is approaching, and of course Campaign 2026 is already off and running. Thanks again for joining us. We hope you make it a good week ahead.